Hey, shalom, shalom from your Dutch Uncle John. Now, you know, what is a chiasmus? That's what we're going to talk about today. And the dictionary definition says it's a noun, and it's a rhetorical or literary device in which words, grammatical constructions, or concepts are repeated in reverse order in the same or modified form. Whatever. Okay, the best is to give you an example. Okay, and here's a very short one. Never let a fool kiss you, and never let a kiss fool you. Notice how the two words are repeated in reverse order, and you have this kind of X formed here. Well, it's not a coincidence that it's an X. X is the Greek letter here, chi. All right, and chi is the 22nd letter of the Greek alphabet. And chi, from this word or letter, we get chiasmus, where two things get reversed. Okay, so you've seen there a secular example, but the Bible is full of these. Okay, in fact, Yeshua Jesus himself said in Matthew 20:16, "So the last shall be first, and the first shall be last. For many be called, but few chosen." Notice the X pattern there with last and first. And we usually write the chiasmus in this form, like A, B, B1, A1. All right? So this is a very short one. There are also many others much longer. And this whole concept of the first shall be last and the last shall be first, we know Yeshua Jesus, he was born on the Feast of Tabernacles, Sukkot, which is the last feast. So you have his first, his birth, at the last, right? And more examples. Here's a longer example in the book of Genesis, chapter 6. This is Noah and the flood. Okay? Starting in 6:10 it says, "And Noah begat 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth." Verse 13, "And God said to Noah, The end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. And behold, I will destroy them with the earth." So you have here an A, B, C. You've got Noah having 3 sons. The end of all flesh is coming before me, and I will destroy the earth with a Okay, a curse here on the earth. In verse 14, he starts explaining about building the ark. He wants it covered inside and outside with pitch. He gives the length, width, and height. He wants windows in the top. He wants 3 decks. Okay, so we'll call part D the ark. E, it says, "Behold, I myself am bringing floodwaters on the earth, to destroy from under heaven all flesh, in which is the breath of life. Everything that is on earth shall die." So in part E, he is announcing the flood. In F, he says, "I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall go into the ark, you and your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you. And of every living thing of all flesh you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark, to keep them alive with you, and they shall be male and female. Of the birds after their kind, of animals after their kind, and of every creeping thing of the earth after its kind, 2 of every kind will come to you, and keep them alive." So here in F, he's talking about every living thing of all flesh. Okay? All living creatures. In G, it says, "You shall take for yourself of all food that is eaten, and you shall gather to yourself, and it shall be food for you and for them." So G is talking about food. In H, "You are to take with you 7 pairs of every kind of clean animal, a male and its mate, a pair of every kind of unclean animal, a male and its mate, and 7 pairs of every kind of bird of the air, male and female, to preserve their offspring on the face of all the earth." So you are to take with you every kind of clean animal. So he talks about animals in H. In I, it says, "On that very day Noah entered the ark along with his sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and his wife, and the 3 wives of his sons." And they entered, the male and female of every living thing, as God had commanded Noah, and the Lord shut them in. So under I, we have entering the ark. And under J, verse 17 of chapter 7, for 40 days the flood kept coming on the earth, and the water rose and covered the mountaintops to a depth of 15 cubits. So J, we have the waters are increasing. Now we come to verse 1 of chapter 8. But God remembered Noah and all the animals and livestock that were with him in the ark. And God sent a wind over the earth, and the waters began to subside. So we're going to call this X. This is the Chi. Everything changes here when God remembered Noah. What happens next? In verse 14 of chapter 8, by the 27th day of the second month, the earth was fully dry. So we have J1, the waters decrease. And then God said to Noah in verse 15, come out of the ark, you and your wife, along with your sons and their wives. So it's exiting the ark in I. And then in verse 2 of chapter 9, the fear and dread of you will fall on every living creature on the earth, every bird of the air, every creature that crawls on the ground, and all the fish of the sea, they are delivered into your hand. So H, he's talking about the animals. And then he says, everything that lives and moves will be food for you. Just as I gave you green plants, I now give you all things. So we're talking about food. Verse 9 and 10. I now establish my covenant with you and your descendants, and with every creature that was with you, the birds, the livestock, and every beast of the earth, every living thing that came out of the ark. So it's all living creatures, matching up F1 with F. Verse 11, I will establish my covenant with you. Never again will all life be cut off by the waters of a flood. Never again will there be a flood to destroy the earth. So he promises no future floods in E1, which matches up with E, a flood was announced. Verse 10, the birds and livestock and every beast of the earth and every living thing that came out of the ark, which we just read a moment ago, talks about the ark again. And then in Genesis 9, 12 through 16, God said, this is a sign of the covenant I am making between me and you and every living creature with you, a covenant for all generations to come. I have set my rainbow in the clouds, and it will be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. Whenever I form clouds over the earth and the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will remember my covenant between me and you and every living creature of every kind. Never again will the waters become a flood to destroy all life. And whenever the rainbow appears in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of every kind that is on the earth. So he now blesses the earth with a rainbow versus cursing the earth under part C. And this applies to all life on earth, which matches up with B. And then the story ends here with, and the sons of Noah who came out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And Ham was the father of Canaan. These were the sons of Noah, and from them the whole earth was populated. So we end up with A1, Noah and his sons, which match up beautifully with A. Notice the whole Noah story is chiastic in nature. And I showed you it happens in small verse, it happens in whole stories, it happens all over. Okay? We'll have a drink for that. Today we've got Lubimi pomegranate juice and water. Look at King Solomon's words in Proverbs 31, starting in verse 4. It is not for kings, Lemuel, it is not for kings to drink wine, or for rulers to desire intoxicating drink. Otherwise they would drink and forget what is decreed, and pervert the rights of all the needy. Give intoxicating drink to one who is perishing, and wine to one whose life is bitter. And let him drink and forget his poverty, and remember his troubles no more. If we move everything to the left, by the way, Lemuel, you see the L on the end, that's God, and Lemu, this is short, Solomon's name in Hebrew is Shlomo, and you can hear the the L and the M, Shlomo, and the U is the O. Okay, so Lemuel is like a little Solomon of God, Shlomo of God. It would be like a nickname that his mother would call him. So that's who Lemuel is here. But if we put it all on the left justified, you can see there is a chiastic structure to this also. The first line talks about it is not for kings to drink wine, or rulers to desire intoxicating drink is B. Otherwise they will drink and forget what is decreed and pervert the rights of all needy. B1 matches up with B, give intoxicating drink to one who is perishing. A1, and wine to one whose life is bitter. Let him drink and forget his poverty and remember his troubles no more. So you can see even Solomon is incorporating these chiasms in his writings when he talks about wine and intoxicating drink, which I'd rather have a bottle in front of me than a frontal lobotomy. The New Testament also we had one earlier with Jesus. Here's another one Jesus said, Matthew 2 or Mark 2:27, and he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, and not man for the Sabbath. We can put it in chiasm form, A, B, B1, A1. By the way, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. There are so many, the Jews particularly, it's almost as if the Sabbath is this rule that they must keep, and you've got to be there by sundown, and you can't carry anything in your pocket, and you can't turn on a light switch, and you're following all these rules to make the Sabbath happy or to make God happy. But that wasn't the plan. The plan was the Sabbath was given to man so that man could have a day of rest and a day to contemplate and refresh and worship and celebrate and praise. You understand? The Jews, I believe, have twisted that, and Yeshua is correcting them here. In fact, the Old Testament, it even ends with a chiasm. Okay, look at Malachi 4, 5, and 6. He says, behold, I will send Eliyahu, Elijah the prophet, before the coming of the great and awesome day of the Lord. And he will turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the hearts of the children to their fathers. Otherwise, I will come and strike the land with a curse. You can see the chiastic structure here, turning hearts of fathers to their children, hearts of children to their fathers. And I always like to point out that the Old Testament, the Tanakh, ends with a curse. The whole Old Testament ends curse. You know, the Jews are anticipating, looking for, waiting for, can't wait for their Messiah, and then all of a sudden it ends in a curse. It's almost as if you need another book to follow to undo this curse. Thus, the New Testament, the Brit Hadashah. Okay? But as I said, the Old Testament ends with a chiasm. Okay, so I just wanted to point that out to you, that the Bible has this chiastic structure. Okay, to God be the honor, to God be the glory, to God be the praise. Wait! We have a bonus! Okay, here's your bonus. I'm going to show you another example of this. Look in Genesis 17, okay, starting in verse 1. This is the Abrahamic covenant, okay, this is huge. It's huge, it's huge. Starting in verse 1, it says, when Abram was 99 years old. I would like to pause for a moment and show you the verse prior to this. And that would be the end of chapter 16, 15 and 16, and Hagar bore Abram a son, and Abram gave the name Ishmael to the son she had born. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to him. So that's the verse previous. So we have a 13-year gap that we don't know what happened in that time. Okay, but now he's had one son, and now Abram is 99 years old, and we'll call that A. All right, and B, it says, this is continuing verse 1, the Lord appeared to him and said, I am God Almighty. Walk before me and be blameless. I put a little asterisk here by Almighty. In Hebrew, that word is Shaddai, Shin, Dalet, Yod. And I call attention to this just so you know that is the first mention of Shaddai, Almighty, in the Bible. It's always wherever you see the first mention of something that helps define it, okay? So it's nice to see some of these first mentions. Part C will be verse 2, where this is God's first speech. And he says, I will establish my covenant between me and you, and I will multiply you exceedingly. So here he's promising a covenant, okay, or to establish a covenant. In part D, it says, then Abram fell down, and God said to him, let's just take those first four, A, B, C, D. We have Abram is 99. The Lord appears to Abram. God's first speech, I will establish my covenant. And then Abram falls on his face. If the story begins A, B, C, D, then it should end D, C, B, A. If my chiastic theory was working. All right? Look at E. E is the next speech of God, his second speech. It's verse 4. As for me, this is my covenant with you, and you will be the father of many nations. No longer shall your name be called Abram, but your name will be Abraham, for I have made you a father of many nations. I will make you exceedingly fruitful. I will make nations of you, and kings will descend from you. I will establish my covenant as an everlasting covenant between me and you and your descendants after you, to be your God and the God of your descendants after you. And to you and your descendants I will give the land where you are residing, all the land of Canaan, as an eternal possession, and I will be their God. Okay, in part E, there are a couple things here. One, you can see some of the things that we've highlighted here in God's second speech. One, he's changing Abram's name to Abraham, so we have a name change. He's going to be the father of nations. He mentions nations 3 times. And kings will descend from you. So in part E, we have God announcing this covenant. Okay? And there's a name change. There are nations and kings and a blessing for Abraham at this point. All right? And before we go on, I just want to point out some of those important words in there. He says here, as for me, this is my covenant with you. Remember that word covenant is brit, bet, resh, yod, tav. Okay? Bet, resh is bar, sun, yod is hand, tav is cross. So the word brit breaks down to son with hand on cross. There's the ultimate covenant. God says, I will come down and I will take your punishment. I will die on a cross for you, and my blood will cover your sins. And if you accept that, come on up to heaven and spend eternity. It's that simple. It's all by faith. The other thing that's mentioned in here, we said name. It is a name change, right? And the Hebrew word for name is Shem, Shin, Mem. And in this verse, he has a cough on the end, a final cough. Remember, the final cough is looks like this. It's an open palm, and if you put it at the end of a word, it means your. So Shemekah is your name. It's twice in verse 5 of chapter 17. Another thing he talks about are the nations. In Hebrew, that is the goyim. Singular is goy. A goy is a non-Jew. The goyim are the non-Jews, the nations. Okay? There are two groups on the planet, according to this. There are the Jews, and there are the goyim, the non-Jews. All right? And by the way, that word goyim sometimes has kind of a negative definition today. The Jews would use it as, he's just a part of the goyim. They look down, or maybe a pejorative using of that word. In Abraham's time, there were no Jews. Everybody was the same. So there it literally meant the nations. Okay? Today, as 2000 BC, today, 2000 AD, it pretty much represents the non-Jews and non-Hebrews. Okay? Another thing that's mentioned in this verse is the Melachim. Remember, Melachim, Melech is the word for king, and if you pluralize it with a yod mem on the end, Melachim, kings. Just little reminder words here. Okay? And now we get to F. F is the actual covenant. It starts in verse 9. It says, God also said to Abraham, you must keep my covenant, you and your descendants in the generations after you. This is my covenant with you and your descendants after you, which you are to keep. Every male among you must be circumcised. You are to circumcise the flesh of your foreskin, and this will be a sign of the covenant between me and you. Okay, so I told you Brit meant covenant, and they have this word, the Brit Milah. This tells you what kind of covenant. Remember, God had a covenant a little while ago with Noah. He's going to put a rainbow in the sky, promising that he will never flood the earth again. So there are different kinds of covenants. This is the Brit Milah, the circumcision covenant. And by the way, that word Brit, remember, there's a group of Jews on the planet that whenever a word ends in a tav, they will pronounce it with an S. Why? I don't know. But there's a whole group that do it one way and a whole group that does it the other way. And if you're trying to learn Hebrew and you're hearing somebody and you just don't know what these words are they're pronouncing, if a lot of them end in S, convert them back to T's, and it's a Brit. Okay, like they'll call it a bris. If you've watched TV shows where there's Jewish characters, and they might mention, yes, on Saturday I have to go to a bris at 4 o'clock. A bris is a Brit. They're doing that S for the T. Okay, you'll often hear Jews say, "Good Shabbos." Shabbos is Shabbat. It ends in a tav, so they change it to an S. Okay, just be aware of that, because it can be very confusing if you don't know that they do that. Like, what are these new words that I'm hearing? Okay. Continuing, look at 2 chapters earlier in Genesis 15. This is when God tells Abraham that he's going to bless him and his descendants will be more than you can count. Okay, and then in 15:6, remember Abraham, it says, and Abraham believed Yahweh, and Yahweh credited it to him as righteousness. Wow, that is a huge verse. Our whole salvation hinges on that, because it's salvation by faith. Abraham believed God, and God credited to him as righteousness. You can only get to heaven if you're righteous. How are you righteous? By believing God. Okay? And in that covenant there that he does in chapter 15, remember, he has Abraham, who's Abram at the time, he has Abram take these 5 animals and cut them in half, and then he puts Abram in 2 birds, and then he puts Abram to sleep, and God walks between these cut animals to seal this brit, to seal this covenant, okay? And it's, if I don't keep my promise, may I, God, end up like these animals cut in half, okay? This, by the way, this brit is an unconditional covenant. Abram was asleep. He didn't have to do anything. It's all on God here. God made a promise, and God is the one walking between the pieces, guaranteeing that he will keep this covenant. It says, starting in 17, and it came to pass when the sun went down, it was dark, that behold, there appeared a smoking oven and a burning torch that passed between those pieces. On the same day the Lord made a covenant with Abram, saying, to your descendants I have given this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates. And all of these tribes. So, you know, it's interesting. The promised land that he's promising goes from the river in Egypt, that's the Nile, until the great river Euphrates, which goes through Baghdad, Iraq. That is the promised land. You know, whenever you hear people talk about the West Bank, and they're talking about the West Bank of the Jordan. No, you want to talk about the West Bank. The promised land is the West Bank of the Euphrates. Okay? God promised this much. Right now, the Jews have this much, and the world is having a fit because they have this much. Someday, they're going to have this much from the Nile to the Euphrates, that which was promised. Can't wait. Okay, so that's an unconditional covenant. By the way, that covenant that we just talked about there in 15, chapter 15, where is the first hint of that? You can actually find a hint of it back in Genesis 1:1. Remember, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim va'et haaretz. Look at the first word, Bereshit. Right in the middle of that word Bereshit, you have an aleph and a shin. Aleph is God's letter, the head of the ox, strength. Shin is two teeth, destruction. So if you look at just the pictures of them, you have Aleph, Shin, strong destruction. What destroys everything? Fire, Aish in Hebrew. It's where we get the word ash, comes from there in English. So in the middle of the word Bereshit, the first word of the Bible, we have fire. And the four remaining letters on either side is Bet, Resh, Yod, Tav, covenant. It's the word covenant. You have a fire in a covenant. That's the Genesis 15 Abrahamic covenant here with God, that he's promising many descendants and all this land. It's hidden in the very first word of the Bible. Very, very clever. Okay, continuing on with F, starting in verse 12, it says, generation after generation, every male must be circumcised when he is 8 days old, including those born in your household and those purchased from a foreigner, even those who are not your offspring. Whether they are born in your household or purchased, they must be circumcised. My covenant in your flesh will be an everlasting covenant. But if any male is not circumcised, he will be cut off from his people. He has broken my covenant. Some things I want to point out here is when he is 8 days old, okay, this is when the Brit Milah, the circumcision covenant, must take place. Why 8 days old? Remember, 8 is new beginnings. And remember, the 8th day of the week is a new week, right? 7 days in the week, the 8th day is the beginning of a new week. There were 8 people on the ark, on Noah's ark. That's a new beginning. Noah, his wife, 3 sons and 3 daughters. Okay? And circumcision is on the 8th day, a new beginning. Okay? In fact, the 8th millennia begins eternity. If you calculate from Adam until Yeshua, it's 4,000 years. You can add them all up. And from, give the dates and the ages, everybody. From Yeshua Jesus until today is 2,000 years. So there's 6,000 years total. And we have a 1,000-year reign of Messiah, 1,000 years of peace, the millennial reign that's coming when Yeshua returns. And there's the 7,000 years, and then 8,000 starts eternity. It's a new beginning. You get the picture? And remember, twice in the Bible, once in the Old Testament, once in the New Testament, he said to God, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is like a day. So he has set apart 7,000 years for this endeavor with mankind. 7,000 years to God is a week. 7 days. Okay? Very nice. And this circumcision covenant, it includes those born in your household, so there's your family, those purchased from a foreigner, will be a slave, servant, and those who are not your offspring, the goyim. So, the covenant blessings that are coming from following this circumcision covenant, these covenant blessings are for all. Your family, your servants, and the nations. Beautiful picture there in F. Okay. What else? Whether they were born in your household or purchased, they must be circumcised. Verse 13 says, my covenant in your flesh will be an everlasting covenant. But if any male is not circumcised, he will be cut off from his people. He has broken my covenant. Notice, this is a nice picture, that the group is not held responsible for any one individual's decision. Right? If someone decides not to be circumcised, the whole group is not punished, but that person will be cut off. So, in our chiastic structure of Genesis 17, F shows us God's third speech, which is actually the covenant. Okay? All right. So, the sign of the old covenant was circumcision. Okay? Cutting of the foreskin was actually significant in two different ways. One, the cutting of the foreskin symbolized that God was setting apart a group of people to become a holy nation. All right? But this came with a price, because the Jew who actually underwent circumcision had to remember, you know, if I fail to keep any terms of this covenant, I may be cut off from you, God, and cut off from your presence, and cut off from the light of your countenance, and cut off from your blessings and your blessedness, right? Just as I have ritually cut off the foreskin of the flesh, you will cut me off from all the benefits that you have for me, right? So there's a kind of a two-edged sword there, right? He's setting them apart as a holy nation, but there's price to pay if you don't follow. Okay? And he makes it quite clear in 14, one who is not circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin, that person shall be cut off from his people. He has broken my covenant. Okay? And if you're cut off, you're not getting the blessings, right? You're going to get the what kind of blessings? You know, maybe your fruitful womb of your wife, productive fields full of harvests, okay, protection from enemies. There's just heaps and heaps. You can look in Leviticus 26. There's a whole bunch of the blessings that you will receive for keeping his covenant, okay. And here, look, you can see, you're going to get, here's a whole list of them. Rain in their season, peace to the land. What else? I like 5 of you will pursue 100. 100 of you will pursue 10,000. He will multiply them. He will be your God and you will be his people. You know what this sounds like? It sounds like the new heaven and a new earth. That's what's coming when Yeshua comes and rules and reigns. That's the blessings of keeping covenant. If you want to know the consequences for breaking covenant, my goodness, they're everywhere. Okay, here's Leviticus 26. He's got a whole bunch of them there. Okay, I'm just leaving it on the screen here for a minute, or freeze frame it and look at them. And And if that's not enough, here's some more. Ooh. I will lay waste to the land. You will flee as one flees the sword. You will fall when no one pursues you. You will stumble over one another. In other words, the bottom line, you will be cut off, which is what the covenant said. All right? And God, He must punish. You know, we've talked about this in other videos. God is perfect in everything He does. And God is a judge. And one of the things a judge must do is punish. If I stab somebody and they take me to the judge and I say, Judge, yes, I stabbed him, but I'm sorry. And the judge says, oh, well, if you're sorry, you may go free. That is a bad judge. God is not a bad judge. He is going to give a fair punishment. And the punishment is, if you break God's rule, whatever it is, thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not lie, thou shalt not covet, thou shalt not murder. You break any, just one of those, you are now broken off, and your punishment that you deserve is death. It sounds harsh, but He's the God of everything. And He's not playing games when He tells you don't do something and you do it. Okay? His holiness, by the way, requires Him to punish. His holiness mirrors God's nature. His righteousness refers to God's acts. And His holiness and His righteousness require that He punish. But there's nothing that says He can't leave His throne and come to earth and take the punishment for us. And that's what He did in the form of Yeshua, His Son, Yeshua Jesus. Jesus came and He lived a perfect life. And false accusations are brought against Him, and He's nailed to a cross as our sacrifice. Abraham even said, when he was up there on the mountain with Isaac, the Lord Himself will provide the lamb. No lamb was provided on that mountain. A ram was provided on Abraham's mountain, but no lamb was. Abraham was seeing into the future that God Himself was going to provide. God Himself will provide the lamb, the sacrificial lamb. You need a sacrifice, a blood pure, innocent sacrifice to cover your sins. And that's the Lamb of God, Yeshua. How cool is all this? How it all fits. And so Yeshua is hanging on a cross, and God is looking down upon Him. Okay? And you know, you think about Yeshua and God, they're one. Right? And then the Spirit. There's three. The three are one. And they are tight. They've been tight for eternity. You know, being nailed to a cross, I'm sure that there was pain in the hands and the feet, the crown of thorns, the back being beaten, the beard being pulled out. All these things hurt. The spear in the side hurt. But I think none of that even registered on Jesus at the time, because of the huge pain He had, because God turned His back on Him. There was a separation between Father and Son that they have never been separated before. That had to be just overwhelming. Remember, Jesus has taken on all the sins of everyone. That guy who said, no, I'm not going to be circumcised. I'm going to, and he gets cut off. That sin gets put on Jesus. Every lie and every murder and every stealing and every cursing God's name and every sin of everybody is all put on Yeshua on that cross. That weight is huge. That has to be painful. And the separation from the Father, unbelievably painful. You get it? Okay? So God turns His back on Yeshua. And then the lights go out. I mean, you talk about bad going to worse. going to worse. It just seems like everyone is against him. But at that time, Yeshua now, he's hanging on this cross alone, forsaken, despairing. And by the way, alone, that is horrible. Alone. Imagine, people always talk about, oh, well, if I go to hell, I'm going to go to hell. I'll be down there with all my buddies, and we're going to have a good old time down in hell. No, you're not. We always think of hell as brimstone and fire and heat. Yeah, that's going to be bad. But I think the worst part is alone. It'll be dark, black, alone, forever. Talk about, and the heat, and all that, but alone, the despair, that it's just got to be crushing, that it's never going to end. It's not going to be party central down in hell, y'all. So, God's turned his back on Yeshua. He's hanging on the cross, in the dark, bleeding. But God said, when I see the blood, I will forgive their sins. The blood covers the sin. And that's what happened. God noticed the blood. And that Jesus' righteousness, that he had done nothing wrong to deserve this punishment, his righteousness then shone from the cross, and it illuminated the world. It illuminated us. For those who believe and look to the cross, God now looks at us, and we're all illuminated by Yeshua Jesus' righteousness. Beautiful picture. God had to turn his back on Yeshua. What did it say in that covenant F section there? It said, you will be cut off. So that guy who didn't get circumcised, that sin went to Jesus. And what's the punishment for not being circumcised? You will be cut off. And Jesus was cut off. God turned his back on him. If he had not been forsaken on the cross, we would still be in our sins. We would not have any redemption. We have no salvation. Jesus had to submit himself to his Father's will, and he had to endure that curse so that we might experience this ultimate blessedness. Okay? So, God had to turn his back on him. And by the way, look at Isaiah 53, Isaiah 53, verse 10 starting. It says, yet it pleased Yahweh to bruise him. He has put him to grief. When you make his soul an offering for sin, he shall see his seed. He shall prolong his days, and the pleasure of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. I'll let you read the rest. But you understand, God was delighted that his son took this. Because Jesus could have said, no, I'm not doing it, Dad. You just send everybody to hell, and you and me and the Spirit will just go on, just the three of us. The only way that salvation could come to the world was that Yeshua would bow to his Father's will and take this punishment, because God had to punish. Nice picture. Okay, let's move on. Verse 15 of chapter 17. Then God said to Abraham, as for Sarai, your wife, do not call her Sarai, for her name is to be Sarah. And I will bless her, and will surely give you a son by her. And I will bless her, and she will be the mother of nations. Kings of peoples will descend from her. I'm calling this section E. Why? Well, look at the things that are happening. First, we have a name change. This is God's fourth speech. Okay? And the name change, remember, he changed Abram's name, and now he's changing Sarai's name. And Yahweh's name, remember, is Yud, He, Vav, He. Yud is hand. Hay is behold, something is revealed. Vav is a nail. Hay is behold, something is revealed. So Yahweh's name, Yud Hey Vav Hey, the hand reveals, the nail reveals. It lets you know who Yahweh is. And that Hey, that blessedness, that this outpouring of revelation, or that behold, something is going to be revealed. That Hey, that's grace. And you see God he's full of grace. He's got two of them. And one of them he gives to Abram, who becomes Abraham. And the other one he gives to Sarai, and she becomes Sarah. By the way, the Hebrew word sar means prince. You put a hey on the end. Sarah is princess. It's a feminine ending, putting a hey on the end. And what else does it say in E? It says, I will bless her, and will surely give you a son by her. I will bless her. She will be the mother of nations. Kings of peoples will descend from her. Look, we have a name change. We have nations, and we have kings. Where have we seen that before? That was in capital E. God's second speech was names, change, nations, and kings. A blessing of Abraham. Now in little e, we have God's fourth speech. We have a name change. We have nations and kings coming from Sarah. And we have blessing Sarah. Beautiful. Part D, verse 17, it says, Abram fell face down. Then he laughed and said to himself, can a child be born to a man who is 100 years old? Can Sarah give birth at the age of 90? Verse 18, and Abraham said to God, oh, that Ishmael might live under your blessing. So here in part D, we have Abraham falls on his face. Well, that matched up with capital D up above when Abraham falls on his face. Chiastic structure forming here. Very nice. And notice, Abraham says to God, well, what about Ishmael? Can't this covenant go through Ishmael? So he is speaking up and trying to get the covenant for his first son. Okay? But that's not what God had planned. God wanted the pure husband and wife together to have the son, not the husband and the wife's handmaiden. That's not the godly way. So he wants to do it the right way. Verse 9, it says, but God replied, your wife Sarah will indeed bear you a son, and you are to name him Yitzhak. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his descendants after him. This is God's fifth speech, and he's establishing a covenant in part C here. As for Ishmael, I have heard you, and I will surely bless him. I will make him fruitful and multiply him greatly. He will become the father of 12 rulers, and I will make him into a great nation. But I will establish my covenant with Yitzhak, whom Sarah will bear to you at this time next year. So, in this fifth speech, okay, a covenant is going to be established. By the way, that name Yitzhak, the word Sahak is a tzadi, chet, kuf. And if you put a yod in front of it, it makes it future third person tense. So tzahak alone means laugh. Put a yod in front, it's he will laugh. So now, every time Abram looks at, thinks about, calls his son Yitzhak, he's reminded of the fact that he laughed at God's promised son. Very nice. He will laugh. And it's future. It's a prophetic picture. Okay? You know, Abraham laughed at God's promised son, so God had him name his son, he will laugh, Yitzhak. On a prophetic level, today a lot of Jews, they laugh at Yeshua, God's promised son and promised Messiah. Right? The Jews will tell you, we don't know anything for sure except Yeshua is not our Jesus. Jesus is not our Messiah. They call him Jesus because that's what every Christian calls him. But his Hebrew name is Yeshua, and Yeshua is the Hebrew word salvation. we should not be calling him Jesus. That's the Greek. That's not even a Greek. Eusus is Greek. Jesus, I don't know where they come from. That's not his name. Okay? But Jews will use his name, Jesus, for curse words, for punchlines of jokes. They laugh at Yeshua. There is a prophetic picture there with Abraham and his promised son, and his name, Yitzhak. He will laugh. And by the way, remember the gematria values. Tzadi is 90, Chet is 8, Kuf is 100. So if we take those numbers, Abraham, by the way, he was 100 years old when this baby was born, and Sarah was 90 when they brought forth 8, a new beginning, Yitzhak. Notice God wove the ages of these people into their son's name. How beautiful is that? So, in part C, we have God's fifth speech, and twice he says, I will establish my covenant. Well, that matches up beautiful with capital C, God's first speech, where he says, I will establish my covenant, keeping the chiastic structure. When he finished speaking with Abraham, God went up from him. On that very day, Abraham took his son Ishmael and all those who born in his household or purchased with his money, every male among the members of Abraham's household, and he circumcised them, just as God had told him. So what happens in little b, the Lord Yahweh departs from Abraham. What happened in capital B, the Lord appears to Abraham, to Abram. So chiastic structure continues. And then the story ends in verse 24. So Abraham was 99 years old when he was circumcised, and his son Ishmael was 13. There's small a. Look at that. Abraham was 99 years old. What's capital A? The whole story starts out. Abram was 99 years old. Very cool. Very cool. You can see a beautiful chiastic structure. And you know what? I picked this story. You can pick any story. I think this weaves all the way through the Bible, this chiastic structure. Jesus himself said it, the first shall be last, and the last shall be first. And he meant it. Okay, there's your bonus. Time to say thanks for watching. By the way, you know, I'm looking here at my grandfather's watch, which, by the way, my grandfather gave me this watch on his deathbed for 20 bucks. But I can see here that we can thank God that I have more to say because we have extra time. So, here's your other bonus. You know, if we take a timeline of eternity, we have eternity past. Micah 5:2 says, But you, Bethlehem Ephratah, though you are little among the thousands of Judah, yet out of you shall come forth to me the one to be ruler in Israel, whose goings forth are from old, from everlasting. From everlasting, that's eternity past. So there is an eternity past. And the Messiah, the one to be ruler in Israel, is going to come from there. Only God is eternity past. So this is letting you know the Messiah is God. And in Revelation, Apocalypsis in Greek, Hitgalut in Hebrew, 22:5, it talks about the new heaven and the new earth, and there shall be no night there. They need no lamp nor light of the sun, for the Lord God gives them light, and they shall reign forever and ever. There's eternity future. So I have begins with eternity past, it ends in eternity future. There's a beginning and end is a chiastic picture there. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In Revelation 21:1, I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth passed away, and there is no longer any sea. So we're kind of moving in, right? That chiastic structure. The chiastic structure is woven into the whole Bible. You know, in Genesis 1:9, we have that, and in the middle of the garden there was the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. In Revelation 22, on either side of the river was the tree of life, bearing 12 kinds of fruit, yielding its fruit every month, and the leaves of the tree for the healings of the nations. So there's a tree of life at the beginning, a tree of life in the end. In Genesis 6:9, we have the days of Noah. In Luke 17:26, Jesus says, as it were in the days of Noah, so it will be also in the days of the Son of Man. So you have days of Noah. Days of Noah, crazy, so bad that God's going to destroy the earth with water. In the end, the days of Noah is going to show up again, and things are going to be so bad, God's going to destroy the earth with fire. Okay? And I'm just picking out random things. You can pick out as many as you want, and you will find these parallels. Okay? Exodus 39:14. There were 12 stones, one for each of the names of the sons of Israel. So we have the 12 sons of Jacob, 12 sons of Israel. In Matthew 10:2, now the names of the 12 apostles are these, and they're the 12 apostles. Genesis 48:5. Remember whenever Jacob comes down to Egypt and meets with Joseph, and Joseph has the two boys, Ephraim and Manasseh. And Jacob, he adopts these two boys. Just as Reuben and Simeon are mine, these two boys shall be mine, Genesis 48:5 says. So we had 12 sons. Levi is taken out because he becomes the priest, and these two boys are added in, so you end up with 13. Okay? And in Acts 1:26, whenever Judas, he goes out and hangs himself after he betrays Yeshua, and they bring in another apostle. Then they cast lots, and the lot fell to Matthias, so he was added to the 11 apostles. So we had 12, and then one was taken out, but then you add the other guy in, so there were 13 there also. Very clever that all this just keeps zeroing in. Isaiah 7:14, therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and she will call his name Emmanuel. It is prophesied that in Alma, a young Jewish maiden who's not married is a virgin. It's prophesied that a virgin will give birth. And you come to Luke 1:26, and in the 6th month the angel Gabriel was sent from God into the city of Galilee named Nazareth to a virgin, and says, behold, thou shalt conceive in thy womb, and bring forth a son, and shall call his name Yeshua. It's prophesied a virgin birth, and a virgin birth occurs. Zechariah 9:9 says, the Messiah will arrive riding a donkey. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you. He is just and having salvation, lowly and riding on a donkey, a colt, the foal of a donkey. And in Matthew 21:7, it says, and they brought the donkey and the colt, and laid their cloaks on them, and he sat on the cloaks. So it's prophesied the Messiah will arrive in Jerusalem riding a donkey. And in Matthew 21:7, notice again the chiastic structure. It's all coming into the center. And what is at the center? It is the cross. Everything, even time, AD, BC, everything is divided by the cross. Very nice picture. So, okay. So there's your bonus. Wow, what a bonus. To God be the praise, to God be the glory, to God be the honor. Just amazing, huh? And you know, I told you that the Old Testament ends in a chiasmus. The New Testament begins with a chiasmus. Look in Matthew 1, verses 1 through 17. It says, the record of the genealogy of Jesus the Messiah, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Then from 2 through 16, it gives the genealogy. And in 17, It says, so all the generations from Abraham to David are 14, from David to the deportation to Babylon are 14, and from the deportation to Babylon to the Messiah, Yeshua, 14 generations. Move everything to the left, and you can make it into a chiasm. First line is Jesus the Messiah. A1 is the Messiah. B is David. B1 is David. C is Abraham. C1 from Abraham. And D is in the center of the genealogy. Old Testament ends in a chiasm. New Testament begins with a chiasm. And the New Testament is full of them. Actually, look, remember Matthew 7, 4 and 5. He says, how will you say to your brother, let me pull that speck out of your eye, and behold, a beam is in your own eye, you hypocrite. First, cast out the beam of your own eye, then you will clearly see to cast out the speck out of your brother's eye. Move everything to the left. We have A, talks about how do you say to your brother. B, pulling the speck out of your eye. C, you have a beam in your own eye. D is you hypocrite. Now we're going to work backwards. C1, cast the beam out of your own eye. B1, then you will see clearly to cast out the speck. And A1, out of your brother's eye. There it is, brother, speck, beam, hypocrite, beam, speck, brother. Chiasmus. There's another food and beverage. We showed you the one from Solomon, with drink. There's one with food in the book of Esther. The book of Esther begins, Ahasuerus, the king, or Xerxes, he throws a 180-day feast throughout his entire empire. And then after the 180-day feast, he throws a 7-day feast. And then because Vashti doesn't come, he picks a new queen, and in verse 18 of chapter 2, there's a feast of celebration for Esther's ascension as new queen. And then in C, Esther 5, remember Esther finds out that there's a plot to kill all the Jews, so she invites the king and Haman to a banquet tomorrow. And tomorrow, when they come to the banquet, Esther requests that they come to a banquet tomorrow. So there's 2 banquets in a row there that have no purpose except they match up as chiastically. Then in B1, there's a feast when they celebrate the reversal of the king's decision that now the Jews can fight back against those who are trying to kill them. And then when it's all established, they have the Feast of Purim, and it's throughout the entire empire in 9:17 of Esther. And because the empire is so big and not everybody got the message, they were going to have like a mini feast the following day in 9:18. So food and beverage wise, you have it showing up in a chiasm again. Just beautiful. So nice. And that Esther story, it's got good guys and bad guys and friends and foes, you know. What's the chiasm that says champagne for my real friends and real pain for my sham friends? You can see the X. All right. Oh, here's a little chiasm from the Noah story. Just look at the lengths of days for these different events. Okay, this is Genesis 7. It says, starting in verse 4, "For after 7 more days I will cause it to rain on the earth." And then in verse 10, now it came about after 7 days. And then in verse 12, the rain fell upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. And in verse 24, and the waters prevailed on the earth 150 days. Then God remembered Noah. There's your X. Okay? Because after that, it says in verse 3 of chapter 8, and the waters receded continually from the earth. At the end of 150 days, the waters decreased. And so it came to pass in verse 6, at the end of 40 days, that Noah opened the window of the ark which he had made. And he waited yet another 7 days in verse 10, and in verse 12, so he waited yet another 7 days and sent out a dove, which did not return again to him anymore. So just look at the days listed here. We have 7 days, 40 days, 150 days. Then God remembered Noah. Then we have 150 days, 40 days, 7 days, 7 days. A chiastic structure. We already showed you a chiastic structure in Noah. Here's another chiastic structure just in the number of days. I'm telling you, this chiastic stuff is everywhere, everywhere. I told you that Jesus was born on the last feast, Sukkot. Jesus died on the first Moed, the first feast, Passover. Again, the first shall be last, the last shall be first. The birth will be on the last feast, the death will be on the first feast. There's that picture. He said, the last shall be first, and the first shall be last. And it all comes down, this chiasm, it comes down to the Greek letter chi, chiasm, right? The X. Okay? I'll give you one last example here. This is by Socrates. It says, bad men live that they may eat and drink, whereas good men eat and drink that they may live. Giving the examples makes it much more easy to understand than a rhetorical or literary device in which words, grammatical constructions, or concepts are repeated in reverse order in the same or modified form. Huh? So, what is a chiasmus? Now you know. Okay, from your Dutch Uncle John, shalom, shalom. Hey! So, what do we do with all this chiasm talk? You know what it shows me? It shows me that God wrote this book. You know, people say, well, man wrote the Bible. Yeah, man's hand wrote the Bible, but God's hand steered man's hand. Because there's 40 authors over thousands of years, yet these chiasms are all there. They're in individual verses, they're in individual stories, they're in the entire book. And they didn't sit and plot and plan and say, well, I'm going to write my book, but I have to make sure I weave this part in so that the chiastic structure works. No, God had that picture in his mind, and he steered the writers to produce this beautiful, beautiful chiastic book. God bless. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.